Welcome to Dave and Dharm Demystify, a FinTech Futures podcast, helping make sense of the world of FinTech and digital finance. Please sit back and listen as the two Ds take a subject and discuss it to make it clearer and easier to understand.
Demystify.
Welcome to today's show. This is actually our final episode, I think, recorded in 2024, and what an episode it's going to be. Dharmesh and I continue to voyage into the quantum realm, and our special guest today to take us through that is Steve Takhar from Quside. Steve, welcome to the show. Be brilliant if you could just introduce yourself, then tell us a bit about Quside.
Yeah, certainly. Dave and Dharm, thank you for the invitation, first and foremost. It's an honor to be talking on this particular podcast. I'll give you a quick update on who I am. So my name's Steve Takhar. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for a company called Quside Technologies SL. My background is basically in sales and marketing over just over 3 decades in various individual contributor, team contributor, leadership roles, working in ecosystems as diverse as Apple, Silicon Graphics, DEC Equipment Corporation, who are no longer with us, EMC, a joint venture called VCE, which was Cisco, EMC, VMware, and Intel, and then latterly back into Dell EMC. And then approximately 5 years ago, I had an epiphany that I really wanted to be involved in a paradigm shift in technology, if for real, as opposed to just talking about it, because what I had done for the previous 3 decades was, to a certain extent, a rejigging of known and old technology that we've been selling. So that's kind of a bit about myself.
You certainly rolled out some big names there. But it's highly appropriate that you've actually come from a very deep background of what we would call traditional compute.
Yeah, no, indeed. And not just compute, but predominantly storage, data management, virtualization, and also a fair delve into the nets and comms world as well. So basically what I would call it is a traditional enterprise IT infrastructure, predominantly based around the data center and everything associated to that in terms of whatever sits in the back end. And there's been various iterations of that, whether it was from client server, whether it was 3-tier architecture, good old cloud computing, for example, and cloud infrastructure. So it's come full gamut. And if you look at the core technologies, well, they were probably what was around many decades before that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about the world of quantum, as it were.
Yeah, so I'm kind of, because you talked about wanting to have a kind of step change, a paradigm shift in terms of the work that you're doing. And, actually listening to you, it sounds like a very familiar story to both Dharmesh and I. I've kind of followed banking, and I think that's probably why we're sort of so interested in things like quantum, because it does sound like they're a kind of complete step change. So can you tell us a bit then about Quside and what Quside does and how you kind of work within Quside itself?
Absolutely. So Quside are an organization that was domiciled back in 2018. We're headquartered in Barcelona in Spain. We were a spin-off from an institute called ICFO, which is one of the leading photonic institutes, certainly within Europe, if not globally. The company now has somewhere in the region of about 70 plus patents. And essentially what we have done is Quside, the technology was first developed back in 2012. Product went GA in 2020. So it's been commercialized for nearly 5 years now. And I'm just going to show something on the screen, which I'm hoping you'll be able to see there. There are 3 quantum photonic chipsets in that. And what Quside does is they design, develop, and manufacture quantum photonic chipsets. And in doing so, what we do is that we essentially provide quantum entropy from those chipsets. We use electronics, we turn them into quantum random numbers, QRNGs, as they're colloquially known as. And then we will essentially inject or ingest that into companies' cybersecurity postures, potentially compute acceleration postures, etc. So we basically embellish existing technology and we add a layer of either quantum safe, quantum resistant, quantum proof technologies, or we can accelerate certain algorithms as well using our chipset technology.
So this sits on top of the traditional compute, does it? Or
Correct, as an adjunct. It's not a rip and replace. It is very much a technology that overlays on top of existing infrastructure. So you will have your existing cybersecurity posture, for example, in a bank, a telecommunications company, a service provider, a governmental institute, and this will come in relatively seamlessly and just sit over the top of that. There's some integration work involved, but it's not a rip and replace. Because if you think about it, certainly for something like a cybersecurity environment, organizations, enterprises, governmental departments, NGOs will have spent many decades. They'll have lots of man-hour resources, and they'll have spent probably a few million pounds, dollars, euros, whichever currency is your favorite this time of month, as it were, in building that. So what we do is we embellish just over the top of it, and we add certain advantages, as you might expect in a business of our nature.
That's interesting because David and I have covered quite a lot of modernization, but really it's software modernization, and this is really hardware modernization. That's amazing.
Correct. So to get what we would call true randomness, you'll have to really rely on hardware of some description or another. When in the classical world, you had basically deterministic-based hardware, which is basically mathematically generated. The technology, which I'm just about to hold up again, is essentially non-deterministic, and it's scientifically generated via quantum mechanics.
So, Steve, can we sort of just walk through that, what you just held up, which is, I think, the Quside number is it the number generator you're holding up? Or?
Yeah, call it QRNG, Dave, because it can be a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, so can you you've sort of talked briefly about what it does and that, but could you just just walk us through, just so I fully understand what it's doing and what's involved? So you've got 2 quantum chipsets, you said, involved.
There's actually 3 quantum chipsets there. There's 2 bare ones, and then there is a full quantum module, a SOC, system on a chip, as you might call it. And essentially what we're doing there is that within that chip, there are 2 diverse quantum photonic lasers, and we essentially take the noise that is generated, the quantum noise that is generated from those lasers within inside that minute nano chip, for want of a better term, and essentially we extract that, we use various algorithms, and we create quantum entropy, which then generates the quantum random numbers, the QRNGs that I alluded to earlier. And then we have that raw fuel, for want of a better term, and then we can inject that into customers' existing cybersecurity postures. But also there are some use cases as well that can be injected into various compute acceleration algorithms as well, potentially.
So would a company buy that device and put it into their servers? How do they kind of get access? I mean, I guess this sort of sits outside of their infrastructure. So how is it then talking to their infrastructure as well?
So there are 3 ways that we go to market, and thereby how an end user customer could potentially consume this technology. One is the OEM market. Now, this is what I'd call the medium to long-term sales cycle, in that the big manufacturers, whether they are compute, nets and communications, cybersecurity manufacturers, they will embed these actual chips into their technology. Very much an Intel Inside type of arrangement. In other words, as they sell their products to their customers, they may well say, yes, it has a Quside chip inside it. There might be a little logo on the system that they're selling, or there might not even be. But essentially, it's embedded into the system, and it's sold on probably as a product, potentially even as a service from that manufacturer. Then there is the second way. So, for example, if you are a bank, an energy company, a utilities company, you can buy that technology from your favorite nets and comm provider, your favorite firewall provider, your favorite cybersecurity vendor, and you buy it as a piece of technology that you might integrate. That's the first area. The second area is what I would call the service provider, systems integrator, ISV market, whereby those organizations will take our technology, they will integrate it into their infrastructure, and they are more likely to sell that out as a service offering, as a cloud offering, as a SaaS offering of some description, and their end users consume it as a service. So very much a utility which they can turn up, turn down, they can monitor it, etc. And they use that as a utility that's coming into them. And then third area is that if an organization wants something that's on-premise, then we've grown a network of value-added resellers, distributors, and partners that will literally take this technology, they will embed it into something like an FPGA or a x86 server, and then they will resell that on And that's probably more of a traditional CapEx on-premise type solution, of which we're developing that area as well. So there's probably 3 areas an end user can consume this.
So, I mean, it's interesting because you were introduced to us by Equinix, who we've done some previous podcasts. So they would sort of fit firmly into the second option. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. That at least makes me think I've explained it correctly. That's good. It doesn't always happen, by the way. So, Dave, top marks, you got it straight away.
Yeah, no, well, that's good. So if people are customers of Equinix, then they can get access to this
Correct.
through that cloud implementation. So in terms of, this is really to improve cryptography for organizations, isn't it? So this is about, Dharm and we've talked to quite a few people about things like Qday and post-quantum cryptography. So is this part of the answer or the answer that companies may be looking for in terms of protecting their cybersecurity post Qday?
Yep, I think there are a lot of aspects to cybersecurity. So I would love to say that this is the panacea to all those ills. However, it needs to be a bit more realistic. It is part of the solution. It's part of an overall ecosystem, part of an overall infrastructure that will be put together. You guys will be familiar with the harvest now, decrypt later scenario.
Yeah.
Predominantly around, say, the threat of quantum computing, and when that becomes all pervasive. So this really is an answer to that. I don't particularly like the term, but I can't say I've thought of anything better. But essentially, we could be using quantum to beat quantum in the future, as it were. The beauty of this technology is that a lot of the mind share, maybe a lot of the investment dollars, have been spent around quantum computing, which, depending on where you're at, might be 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years away from being meaningful and having real live use cases and a stable technology in what is still becoming it's a less nascent market, but it's still a nascent market to a large extent. The technology we're talking about has been commercially available for nearly 5 years now.
Wow. I mean, what this reminds me of is like going back way back when the X386 came out, and optionally you could pay extra to have a maths coprocessor to, increase the maths capability of the X86 chip. It's kind of like that, right? And so it works with existing technology, means that a bank or an insurance company that wants to, let's say, make their systems Quside, they don't have to buy a whole quantum computer and shift everything onto that. This is like, works with the existing tech and allows you to replace the cryptography with something quantum safe without having a whole quantum computer. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. There's a couple of points I'd like to make, Dharm. By the way, I like the x86 plus math coprocessor analogy. I suspect it will only appeal to or resonate with a certain type of individual that you have on your call, but I get it and I like it, and I might just use it, actually. Moving on, but I'll do it depending on the age of the audience that I'm talking to. But secondly, yes, you are correct in that this will help to alleviate a lot of those particular issues right now. But not only can this technology help for the potential near future or far future quantum threat that we've just discussed, but actually it will allow you to be safe from vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and breaches today. So you can still get to the file or the packet, but if it's quantum encapsulated with, say, QRNGs from organizations such as Quside, you can't get to it. You can't open it. You can't interrogate it. You can't see what is in that data set, file, network packet, etc. So it's not only good for the future, it will resonate right now for breaches that are occurring right now.
It's interesting. I'd really like to sort of explore that point around, obviously quantum computers are on a journey, but this is a great example of something which isn't a computer, which is using quantum-based technologies. There's other people talking about things like quantum sensors, and there's a world which sort of sits around quantum. You may be able to answer it, but if not, don't worry. But how does something get that sort of quantum label? So in terms of the chipset itself, is it because it's using protons and to actually achieve the result? Is that what makes it quantum? Is it using entanglement? Is it using superposition? I mean, I'm guessing in the Quside example, it's not doing that, is it? Because it doesn't need to.
Dave, you're going to reach the extremities of my technical knowledge here, but I'm going to give it a bit of a go here. So essentially, everything that we have, say, in classical cybersecurity and classical compute, if there is such a thing, is mathematically generated. So if you have enough compute resources, theoretically, you can crack that. Now, the estimations are it would take hundreds, thousands, millions of years with current compute transistor-based technology to crack that. But it's basically deterministic. If you have enough compute power, there's the possibility you can analyze those patterns and you can decrypt and you can solve it. What we deal with in terms of quantum-derived technologies are technologies that are considered non-deterministic, totally random, and are generally physics-based, and they're essentially exploiting quantum mechanics. Now,
Right.
in quantum mechanics, there are different layers of that. The technology that we use is photonic technology in the chipsets that I'm just holding up again and have done previously on this particular call. So it's really, as long as we're using, I suppose, a subset of quantum mechanics, and then our specific use cases are around quantum cybersecurity, but also that delves into the realms of quantum communications as well.
So, I mean, it's an important point that you raise, which I don't want to lose sight of, because I think this is one of the things that makes it a bit of a game changer, is that traditional compute, as far as I understand, sends electrons around a little circuit and an OR gate that's etched in silicon. But photonic is sending light. So so compute is happening at the speed of light as opposed to the speed of electrons. And that's what makes it faster, better, and more powerful, right?
There is that, but also it gives it the highest degree of probably known randomness that we have.
Right.
I'm going to say in the known universe, which could mean anything, because who knows what is beyond or in our universe. We can debate that separately. So it's that randomness and the fact that it will never, ever be replicated from the 1 second to the next second. And also the fact that the known error rates, so the quality of that randomness also is proven. And I suppose in our particular case, we have amongst the highest scalability and performance, which you alluded to, Dharm, as well. But the thing that makes us unique is there's a term in cybersecurity which hasn't been around for a while, but it's certainly resonating now, is observability. And what our technology allows is we have something called entropy randomness metrology, which allows us to, in a non-invasive way, to actually monitor and measure the randomness. So we or our customers using our technology can then prove to the various compliance and regulatory bodies that they need certification from that this is the highest form of randomness that is known to date. And the quality, the performance, and the scalability is the same from day one as it is in day 100 to maybe at day 1000 in using this type of technology.
Well, what was that term again? Sorry, just so that I can memorize it. Entropy.
Call it randomness metrology methodology.
Randomness metrology.
Methodology.
Great. That's a great one for a dinner party.
Can I ask if this is able to kind of secure, I mean, almost forget Q-Day and quantum making things Q-safe. This just sounds like a better way of securing things anyway. I mean, where do the regulators sit on this? Surely the regulators should be sort of banging down your door and saying this needs to be on every server everywhere to, protect people.
They should indeed. I'm just going back to your dinner party. Mention it maybe over dessert and liqueur. Otherwise, it might set the wrong tone at the beginning if it's done, an initial hors d'oeuvres and cocktails, aperitifs.
And try and say it after having a few of those lovely cocktails you like.
Dave, I didn't want to make it for Dharm. I didn't want to make it easy for Dharm in his dinner party. So I thought,
No, totally.
So, Dave, you would think that should be the case. There are probably 2 or 3 organizations globally that most organizations, certainly in the Western world, adhere to. One is NIST in the US, and secondly, certainly in Europe, BSI in Germany. They're probably the 2 preeminent ones. And obviously we have the NCSQ here in the UK as well. But certainly NIST and BSI seem to get the lion's share of credence in the markets. NIST has finally this year in 2024, in the month of July, they've announced a small number, 3 to 4 quantum-proof algorithms that they're saying these are the standards that things should be built upon. The beauty in using, say, Quside type quantum photonic QRNG technologies is that we can adhere to those post-quantum cryptography vendors' algorithms and technologies fairly easily and simplistically. We have a fairly open system that we can develop with them. And we're doing that with several of those vendors today. So those standards are coming out. From a hardware perspective, it's probably not as clear-cut. At the end of the day, there are standards out there, but generally they are around things such as, say, FIPS compliance or federal information processing, as it were, as opposed to the technology or the hardware must adhere to a standard of X, Y, and Z. However, what we are doing is we're working with some of the leading, say, compute vendors at the moment. We're in some fairly heavy discussions, also with several nets and comms providers as well. In fact, I'll have various calls today after our session with those guys, whereby they're looking to create standards. So it's actually been driven by the vendors and the market themselves, as opposed to any regulatory body at the moment. It is on the software side of things, say such as NIST and a BSI in Germany, but it's not really happening, I suspect, on a hardware perspective. So in conjunction working with some of the hardware manufacturers and vendors, we're trying to drive in some standards. I can't say too much, but there is one particular large vendor who has created something called the Open API Quantum Forum. And there's maybe half a dozen of us quantum vendors in there working with them to try to get to the likes of a NIST to say, can you actually standardize this for this type of cryptographic technology out there for cybersecurity?
Very interesting. Can I ask a sort of more sales-based question, I guess, which is, if you put the word quantum into something, people immediately assume it's about computing. And my experience is that most people know very little about it. So do you find that there's a sort of degree of explaining that you need to do in terms of this isn't computing, this is just something else, but it uses quantum mechanics. So how does that kind of work in terms of the sort of sales and outreach that you do?
So it's fair to say that to garner interest, the word quantum often does that. It was even more so before the AI tsunami hit us.
Right.
But yeah, it's beginning to resonate as well. But if you continue to talk about quantum, certainly to business leaders and business stakeholders, their eyes will start to glaze over after about 5 or 10 minutes or so. So you have to make it applicable to specific use cases and the business metrics. Because if it has no business justification, it's great scientific technology in theory, but if you can't apply it in the real world, it probably isn't going to make any difference. So that's where the non-quantum computing use cases start to come in. So it's fair to say that probably 90% of the quantum mindshare goes in the world of computing. It's fair to say the vast majority of quantum investment dollars and euros and pounds has also done that as well. However, that technology is still somewhat nascent. There are several large players out there at the moment. I'm not going to mention any of them unless you specifically want me to, but 1 or 2 have made announcements in the last week or so, which is good. It keeps the discussion going, but they are still probably 1, 2, 3, 4, several years away from having real life, reliable, stable infrastructure with real business applications. But the other areas that actually have solutions right now are things such as deep physics, which obviously has a certain machine learning AI attachment to it, quantum sensing, which Dave, I think you mentioned earlier in the call, that's a big marketplace. And then the areas that we did in quantum cybersecurity and quantum communications are real live technologies and products right now. And within there, you have post-quantum cryptography and encryption. You have quantum key distribution, QKD. You have the injection of this technology into hardware security modules, HSMs. You have encryptor vendors we are in discussions with of having this as an option, and some already do have it as an option. And then you've got the compute environment that is looking at this quite heavily as well. I would say that there isn't a traditional compute vendor right now that has this technology in place, other than maybe, actually I was about to mention a vendor, I'm not going to do that. There's 1 or 2 vendors that do have that in place right now. But my view is that quantum computing won't certainly within our lifetime be what I would term all pervasive. There will still be the classical transistor-based computing around, and that will still have the majority of the market. I see quantum computing coming in for specific use cases in the years to come, and it will probably start to encroach on high performance and supercomputing. A deal of number crunching needs to be done, which might take hours, weeks, months, days, or whatever, whereas this might be able to do it in a fraction of that particular time. And here's something else I'll chuck into the pot as well. I don't think this technology is going to be available to all to buy and have on premise. National governments, and there is a quantum arms race right now with national governments trying to have their own technology available. And there are 4 or 5 different flavors of quantum technology. I think the major hyperscalers and the cloud vendors will have this technology. And I suspect, to me, unless you're a national government or such a sizable enterprise, you probably won't have the resources, financial people, maybe even infrastructure and technology learning resources available to have this in-house. So you will probably consume it via a service provider. So I think quantum computing in the cloud is probably the way to go for many organizations that will need it for certain specific types of applications.
Very interesting. It's kind of great to get your sense of actually that sort of broader picture. I mean, it sort of feels like 2025 is shaping up to be a quantum year in many ways. But as you say, I think what people then begin to realize when they kind of delve into it is that, you know, there's still a way to go before you kind of get true practical applications in terms of computers itself. Do you feel that AI is now at the point where it can really help sort of speed this stuff along? I guess Google talked about Willow and what Willow could do in terms of its computing capabilities. And, you know, obviously Google has a massive investment in AI. Do you think AI is sort of symbiotically working to push quantum forward?
I don't think it was particularly deliberate, but I think that's how it may well pan out in reality. I think a lot of the quantum computing organizations were sidetracked to a large extent by AI. So, for example, we've got several large prospects, leads, customers that had quantum work streams in place, quantum resources and projects and POCs and MVPs in place. And a few of them have literally had to or have transferred those quantum teams into AI teams. And then for us, and certainly the quantum computing vendors to come back in there, we've had to, how can I put it, merge a business case or a value proposition around quantum AI, specifically in the computing space. Not so much in our quantum communications and quantum cybersecurity space, but I think a lot of the quantum computing vendors have had to, whether they wanted to or not, and it could be that they wanted to anyway, they've specifically merged those two areas of, and you are now seeing the term quantum AI or AI-derived quantum or vice versa out there. So it's happening.
Can I ask, just on that thread then, have you had any banks inquiring about this? Are you in discussion with any banks, you know, or is it too soon? When do you think banks will jump on mainstream?
So the banks, certainly in the enterprise sector, are the leading lights in this technology.
Right.
And there are, I said I wasn't going to name any organizations, but here we go, yeah. People, I'm not saying these are the leaders, but they are certainly the ones that are talking a lot about this, and it's actually out in the public domain. HSBC, Wells Fargo, JPMC, Santander, and I believe people like Bank of America. There is information in the public domain, and they have innovation departments, they have applied technology research departments, they have specific disciplines that are quantum derived and based, and they are looking at areas whereby quantum algorithms, certainly based around quantum computing, processing, can help them. They're looking at certainly can QRNGs help them in their cybersecurity posture. For example, if I'm doing, remote financial applications, it's really an IoT device somewhere on the edge working with a cloud provider or via a cloud provider into their data center, whereby the financial institution's infrastructure resides, as it were, either pure cloud or a hybrid or a private cloud, etc. So all of that is starting to happen. And then there's quantum communications. There are several financial institutions that have done, for example, along with their favorite service provider, quantum key distribution, proofs of concepts, or minimal viable product applications across, say, metro links in various financial centers globally. So those organizations are actively looking for business value in this today.
Yeah, you also spoke to MasterCard that, are all over this space in a big way.
Yeah, indeed.
Amazing. Well, listen, we're really out of time. We're well over, actually. So, but it has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. And you did sort of reference a bit of technology which you're holding up. If people want to see it, then you can see it on our YouTube version of this if you're listening to the podcast. But to describe it, it's like a little black box thing with some silver bits on or gold bits on. So
maybe next time, can we go into more depth about metrology methodology? Because that, is some area that I'm an expert in.
we certainly can. I'll be testing you later.
Yeah. Dave, is Dharm looking for, is he running out of conversational topics for his dinner?
Yeah, I think so. You can imagine Christmas dinner's going to fly past in the Mistry household. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. It's been fabulous.
Dave, Dharm, thank you for the invite and thank you for your time.
Thank you for tuning in to Dave and Dharm Demystify. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in next time as we take another topic and demystify it.